first meeting of the Cost of Living and Community Resilience Scrutiny Inquiry. So welcome. We've got, it's quite a wide-ranging brief. Very much, we've got a lot of work to do over the next number of months. The primary focus, as you saw in your notes for the inquiry, is to look at how the council works to mitigate the effects of the cost of living crisis by building resilience in communities across Swansea. So quite a wide-ranging inquiry, and that would be economic impact, cross-sector collaboration, support services, digital inclusion, transport connectivity, and future preparedness. So quite a range. So thanks. Have we any apologies?
Yes, we have apologies from Adam Davis and Linda James.
Great, thank you. Are there any disclosures? And if there are, Michelle will email you out the template. Okay, not. Obviously we know about the prohibition of whip votes, and there are no public questions. So before we move into the session formally, could I ask the people in the room to introduce themselves for the benefit of the people online? And if we start from me, I'm Lyndon Jones, and I'm going to be the convener of this inquiry.
I'm Michelle Roberts, and I'm the Scrutiny Officer.
And good afternoon. My name is Councillor Michael Locke. I represent Sketty Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Whitmore. I'm the Chief Officer for Commissioning and Resources in Social Services, but I have the cross-cutting portfolio for tackling poverty and enabling communities, which obviously this one fits in. So I'm the lead senior officer. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Richards. I'm the Tackling Poverty Development Manager within Jane's service.
Great, thank you all. I know that Councillor Bob Stewart is going to join us, but until that happens, Jane, would you like to kick off? And then Anthony, I think you're coming in, aren't you? So Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so if I should just give a bit of an overview from us, I know that we really welcome this inquiry. So the cost of living has risen significantly in the UK since 2021, and it continues to impact our communities, disproportionately affecting those low-income households right the way across all areas of Swansea. So the combination of high housing costs, energy bills, and food inflation has really deepened the inequities and put further strain on local support services and networks, so especially as across all areas of the council. Evidence, and Tony will go into more detail of this, shows that the poverty is deepening over time. So the Joseph Rowntree's Foundation identifies almost half of people in poverty are in that very deep poverty. So it's not that there's more people going into poverty, but there are more people going into a deeper depth of poverty, which makes it even more tricky. And again, I won't go into the details. I'll leave Anthony go into the details for that one. The sharp rise in the cost of living means more households are struggling to afford those everyday essentials, food and heating. Debt is a significant issue, with households borrowing more, and that has increased financial pressures, being in arrears on household bills. That also gives us another contemplation to think about how we protect those most vulnerable in terms of safeguarding those vulnerable people from that kind of exposure. So evidence is also telling us about the financial hardship negatively impacting on people's lives and their physical health as well as their mental health. So hopefully the inquiry will learn about different parts of and responses across the whole council. It's really broad, so all of it will touch on little bits of parts, but in terms of its entirety of what we're doing as a whole council approach to tackle those rising the cost of living crisis and those rising costs of living. So we've got that highlight report here today. Gives us a couple of examples of what we've been doing as a council. So we've been running for a couple of years now the Here For You campaigns over the summer and the winter. And then so for 25-26, we put out over £1 million worth of grant funding for the sector. So supporting food, free activities for children, young people, the over 50s, Swansea spaces across the community. So that's that warm spaces, pieces of work, council voucher scheme around Christmas, free bus transport. So all of those those really small initiatives, but it makes a big difference to people's lives, and really that impact that can have on them is really important for us to delve into. And those impact stories, I think, is much more prevalent. That we're not going to have high numbers of, well, we've done this and this has changed, this has turned that curve. It's that really, what does it mean for our communities and what does it mean for those individual people? So really welcome the inquiry and glad to be part of it, and we'll do as much as we possibly can to support as we go through the inquiry. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Jane. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. As Jane said, we're really pleased to be part of this cost of living scrutiny inquiry. It's really important. So what I'm going to do here, just verbally, is just go through some of the highlights that you've already got in the report, but just to point these things out, and hopefully it's a good start in place for the inquiry to look at the issue. So in section 1, just setting out the local strategic context for the work around tackling poverty and the issue around cost of living. So within the council's corporate plan, tackling poverty and enabling communities is one of the objectives, so that every person in Swansea can achieve their potential. And the step within the plan is that we will reduce levels of poverty and mitigate the impacts of being in poverty by rolling out government grants, providing welfare rights advice, and implementing targeted schemes such as the free bus ride initiative and Swansea spaces, like Jane said, the warm hub. So that's within the corporate plan. And then within the local wellbeing plan, there are two objectives that this work fits within. The first objective is live well, age well, and the second one is strong communities. So both of those have commitments and strong contributions to mitigating the impact of the cost of living. And I apologise if I'm repeating some of what Jane said here already in her introduction, but the cost of living has risen significantly in the UK since 2021, following the pandemic, kind of starting with that energy crisis. There are multiple contributing factors, and it can be complex, but those factors include high inflation, particularly around food and energy costs. And since 2021, those cumulative pricing increases have resulted in significantly higher costs of everyday essential goods and services. And meanwhile, average household incomes have not risen in line with that. So as those cumulative prices continue to increase, it makes that gap bigger, and it makes it a harder challenge for people to meet essential everyday costs such as housing, energy, water, food, clothing, and transport, even more challenging for low-income households. A little bit more background here, and there's lots of information to be found about the impact of the cost of living and what it looks like. But food costs have risen by 7% year on year to January 24, so cumulative increase, that's the amount. Private rental housing prices have increased by 6.2% just in the year up to January 2024, and energy costs remain significantly higher than historic averages. I think something that the inquiry panel should understand is how this disproportionately impacts different groups, recognizing that it does disproportionately affect low-income households. It deepens that inequality between those who have and those don't. And as Jane said, that places further strain on local services and networks, whether that be public services or the third sector. Then moving through the report, I've included three sources of information just as a starting point. The first one being the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, which I will reduce to referring as the WIMD from this point. But that was actually recently updated and published in November 2025. The last update of the WIMD was in 2019. If you're unfamiliar with the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, it's the Welsh Government's tool for measuring geographic areas of deprivation across Wales. It divides Wales into 1,917 LSOAs, lower super output areas. And within Swansea, we have 150 of those lower LSOAs. And within our 150, 20 of those LSOAs are within the top 10% of the most deprived LSOAs in Wales. There is a bit of a health warning in terms of the assumptions you can make looking at the rankings of the Welsh Index, and that it is relative. It's a relative index. It changes over time. Do not necessarily mean that there are changes in absolute deprivation levels. And in this iteration, the 2025 iteration, they've used different data sets, methodologies, and some geographies have changed in this update, which means that outputs are not directly comparable to previous iterations of the indices. I think the headline there is that, you know, we have data around. We recognise that poverty can exist in any community in Swansea, and it does. But the WIM tells us where our higher concentrations of geographic deprivation exist within Swansea. So the next source that I've drawn from, and everything I'm saying here really, I'm quoting from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who released the Poverty in Wales report 2025. Subsequently, since preparing this report, they've released a further report, Poverty in the UK 2026, which in the main part has a lot of the same messaging, but I'm referring to this 2025 Wales report here. So looking at, you know, the UK government measures, the main measure of the poverty line, as it were, is 60% median household income after housing costs. So whatever the median income is across the UK, 60% of that is deemed as being the poverty line in terms of the UK measure. There's pros and cons to that. One of the cons to that is across the UK, if all average wages drop, so does that median. And then you could look at that and you could say, well, it looks like no more households have gone, you know, are in poverty. You know, that line moves. It's not necessarily a measure of if there's a household at that line or below that line, do they have enough to be able to afford those essential goods and services? You may be a bit over that 60%, still not, you know, still really struggle to meet that. But so that's the UK measure. But what, for me, a massive headline of this report is the proportion of households in that 60% and below that are not even reaching 50% of the median income, or even 40%. The proportion of households in those categories are growing and have grown quite considerably during this period of the cost of living crisis. So that kind of inequality and showing just how far below the poverty line, you know, the further below the poverty line, the more you're going to struggle with those essential costs of goods and services. And we're seeing that in reality with, you know, the increased demand on services like food banks in Swansea. You know, what we're seeing marries up with, you know, what the data is telling us as well. And And moving a little bit further through the report here, another source that I was keen to draw down for this group was the Bevan Foundation's Snapshot of Poverty in Autumn 2025 report. Now, this is a report which is one of a series of, I think it's 9 reports that they published over a period of time. It is looking at poverty in Wales, and we've looked at the WIMD, so that's a little bit about geography. Joseph Rowntree Foundation tells us about levels of poverty. This report here now starts to tell us a little bit of insight about how people are dealing with the cost of living and what the impact is on daily lives, and a little bit about who is more likely to be impacted disproportionately, which is why I thought it was interesting to bring this to you. So just briefly, 12% of people in the report I've referred to there reported that they sometimes, often, or always struggle to afford the essentials. Nearly a quarter of people in Wales reported missing out on some key essentials, including food and heating, during the period of the survey of the report. 1 in 8 parents said their children had either had to have smaller meals or skip meals entirely. Obviously, that's quite concerning. As Jane said, debt is a significant issue. 29% of people reported borrowing money due to increased financial pressure. In previous reports, they've described that as borrowing money to pay for essential goods and services or household bills. 13% in arrears of at least 1 month on at least one household bill, and 20% of people reported to be further in debt than they were at the same time the year before. I think the next part really is that, you know, as I said, that the cost of living impacts different groups disproportionately. So this particular report, this Bevan Foundation Snapshot of Poverty in Autumn report, does highlight some of those groups that have been disproportionately impacted. It identifies those that are disabled or have a long-term health condition, those that claim universal credit, any household with an income less than £20,000, renters, and parents with children 18 or under, so any household with a child, particularly, although it doesn't point it out in the report, but particularly single parents, I would include there. And of course, in terms of disabled and long-term health condition, households with carers would also be included there. Okay, and finally, just moving to the last section, just giving some examples of the work that we've been involved in to address the cost of living. But first of all, pointing out that, you know, Swansea Council's approach to tackling poverty is that it is an everybody's business approach. So every directorate, every department has a role to play. And this report does identify that tackling poverty and cost of living is a cross-cutting issue for all of Swansea Council directorates, as well as other public and third sector partners. So, you know, we really encourage and we'll help guide if required, you know, looking at, you know, who else within the authority or perhaps our partners, you know, we might want to be involved in this process. But the report briefly highlights some of the work that we do to maximise incomes, reduce costs, and mitigate the impact of poverty, including pointing towards the work of the Welfare Rights and Financial Inclusion team to support people to be able to claim all the benefits that they're entitled to, and the employability team providing one-to-one mentoring to address barriers to employment. And then there's some examples around tackling poverty grants, which we administer, which are themed either to address or mitigate the impact of food poverty or period dignity, and other grants that are more around addressing social isolation. As Jane said, and I will call it an innovative piece of work that we've run now for 2 years, is the Here For You campaigns. over the summer and winter, where we packaged together a number of grants into one package worth over £1 million in over 2025 to support those that are struggling with those everyday costs. Campaigns comprise of food support, vouchers, free activities and travel, and support to maintain the network of Swansea spaces across Swansea. So in the summer, it was over £440,000 worth of support that targeted holiday food so from the food poverty work, that's a pocket of funding that Swansea Council has led on and identified to specifically target school-aged children and their families during school holidays to help deal with those increased costs. Activities, so free activities for children and young people, 50 plus, and free bus travel. And then in the winter, it's all of that, but in addition, it's the network of Swansea spaces, so the warm hubs, again, the free travel, and everything that was included in the summer, as well as the councillor voucher scheme, which Jane talked about as part of that winter package of support. I won't go through and read out the figures that are in the report, but if you were to look at page 7, halfway down, you've got some bullet points there that lay out. Well, I may as well. It's only a short list. Sorry. So we estimate that between the summer and the winter, that those campaigns have provided over 100,000 meals for school-aged children and their families during school holidays. The emergency food aid grant, as part of that, has provided an estimated 15,000 meals. There's been support to maintain 76 Swansea spaces over the winter period, support for 292 projects that are delivering free activities, promoting well-being, arts, sport, tackling social isolation among young and older people, and then 1,139 supermarket vouchers were issued before Christmas to vulnerable households, 90% of which were households with children. And it's estimated that over 1 million free bus journeys have occurred in Swansea since that scheme began. That, I think, concludes my summary of the report. I've tried to pull out the main things for you.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you both do. Excellent. Rob hasn't appeared yet, so what we might do is go into questions. Has anybody got any questions for Jane and Anthony? Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. A lot of interesting information. I'm just trying to clarify in my mind. I'm glad you actually said this is a moving target, if I can call it that, with perhaps some people in not so well-off areas, perhaps better off, and perhaps people in affluent areas that perhaps are struggling as well. With regards to, these schemes, when they actually, do you target or do you record who the, shall we say, in-need households are? Is there a register? Perhaps going back to the voucher scheme over Christmas, it actually comes out to us, and we are schools. Schools don't seem to perhaps keep a register. We leave it up to school to identify perhaps people in need and so on. So generally, is there some sort of register that's actually kept of people that are being identified as being in need?
I'll attempt to answer that question best I can. And thanks for that question. It is a really good question. But I'm aware that there's no master list that Swansea Council holds of the most vulnerable households in Swansea. I think through the course of the journey of this inquiry, I think it would be interesting if agreed to perhaps explore what data is held by different services, what's the capability or opportunity in terms of sharing data. The example of the councillor voucher scheme. So they, households that received vouchers were identified by services. So many of the schools would have been approached by councillors to identify those households that they're aware of that would have needed some help. So I think what you'll find is different programs of support will have different criteria and different ways of identifying and getting support to different households. So, for example, I mean, if you end up looking at kind of revenues and benefits section, and you're looking at data around some of the support that they're able to offer. I'm just thinking of an example recently. There's an example recently where there was a Welsh Government fund that all local authorities received a payment of £100 grant that would be given to those who have both council tax reduction and a disabled band relief, if I've got the terminology correct. So in terms of that, that's data that Revs and Bens hold, and they could interrogate that data and identify the 180 people in Swansea that were eligible for that and roll that out, and the budget is there. Everyone who meets that particular criteria, that support is available. Then if we look at the examples of like the tackling poverty grants that we administer around food poverty or period dignity, those are grants that do not go direct to individuals. They're grants that support the network of services and organisations in Swansea to be able to provide that support. So, for example, with the emergency food aid grant, many of the applying organisations are food banks or organisations that are delivering crisis food support. Then that's what the intention of that funding is for. So then they are delivering that service to either people who are accessing that support directly or are being referred by another service within Swansea. So it varies, but it varies, I would say, based on what support you're looking at. And now I think that's something that you'd want to kind of dig into and try to get a deeper understanding of as you look at the different programs and services or support that the council and the partner provides.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Do you want to come back? A very good question, actually. Got it really.
Yeah. The only thing it's often on the television where they're actually saying that there are so many millions of pounds. I'm talking about nationally now that people don't claim. And I thought there would be some sort of identified areas where people are in need. I would have thought perhaps the best way to get those people to actually claim the money would be really to identify them in the first place and then contact them, because a lot of people perhaps for whatever reason don't seem to pick up on that they're entitled or could claim.
Sorry, Anthony is poised to answer that. There he is.
Yeah, thanks again, Councillor. I mean, yeah, so drilling down and looking at unclaimed benefits as part of that, I would defer to. I don't want to speak, on behalf of our welfare rights team, who have extremely specialist knowledge in the subject matter there. But an example I'll give, pension credit, is one of those reportedly significantly underclaimed benefits, and we do within working with the Revs and Bens team, we are able to identify cohorts of people that perhaps meet a certain criteria that we can approach or we could write out to and say, we think that you might be eligible for A, B and C. We'd suggest that you seek support or give us a ring or, you know, put out an offer of that support. So yeah, we absolutely do want people to claim everything that they're entitled to from a benefits perspective. And quite often, looking at that pension credit as an example, pension credit's also a gateway qualifier for other discounts. So, for example, if you do claim pension credit, your TV license will be cheaper as a result. You can claim that discount as a pension credit claimant to receive a further reduction on something else. So we absolutely do want to, but I think in terms of data and intelligence around those who are under claiming, I would suggest that perhaps that's something I would direct towards revenues benefits and perhaps our welfare rights team to bring in their expertise to have a look at that in a bit more detail.
Great, thank you, Jane.
Yeah, and just picking up on that as well, there's another example of working tax childcare credits as well. So there's so I guess it's just so we've got pension credits. We know that they're underclaimed. We do campaigns. There's the working tax childcare credits. We're looking at that. That's a different section of the council. But I guess coming back to the question, is there one definitive list? And that's there isn't, because it's really, really complex and difficult. And whilst it's good, I think it would be really good to look at all of it. I don't think I'd be wanting just one definitive list, because it's got to be, there's also a really important part of it being community led, and actually what you see, especially as ward councillors in the wards and out in the communities, and that intelligence coming through about people who are really struggling that wouldn't appear on any list. So whilst it's that's probably why it would be, you know, thinking of, you know, the councillor's question about the vouchers. It's much easier if somebody give you a list and say it's these people, but actually it's not just about the data, it's about the lived experience and people who are living that you might not, you know, you can see about the areas of deprivation in the WIMD, but it's not just because you live in an area of deprivation. You might be okay, you might live in a really, really affluent area and really be struggling. So you've got to take it in that context and really understand that community intelligence coming from the ground, and how all of our workers, because as a council, we're a big operation, isn't it? And so that's, I guess, why we've got the tackling poverty as in everybody's business model. So it's that intelligence that you're all seeing and going, hang on a minute, something's not quite right here with this person, and where do we go, and where? So it's thinking about, so the data is really important, and especially when you're maximising benefits and people and those campaigns. But yeah, it's just that warning of it's just not one size approach would have all. But I'd imagine as the inquiry goes on and you talk to different directorates, they will all have a list of something somewhere, but it's not necessarily going to be the same list. So that would be really interesting. So housing would have probably, whether they're the same people who are not maximising their pension credits, or is that a different? And I don't know. My suspicion is it's different lists because of the depth of poverty that you see in different areas. But I guess we would be needing to test that and to understand.
Thank you. I think the important thing with that is that we actually catch those people. Myra has been waiting very patiently there. So, Myra.
Hi all. As you can see on Windermere, it's Pend area again on the top. We always have been the biggest thing of deprivation up here. We're finding a lot of people are going into work, full-time work, but they are really struggling. They're coming up to our local food bank up the top of the estate. It's an independent food bank. And they come in more now to the food bank, because I have asked them personally myself, what is going on? And they say, oh, I am struggling now. I get housing benefit top up for my rent. I get rent top up off UC. Sometimes, like over Christmas, this person done some overtime. Because she done the overtime, UC took the top up rent off her. She lost that for the whole month, where she had to find the full rent. Now that's left her 1 month struggling because she done overtime like 2 months before. It's come out and she's a month down on her rent. the extra top up she gets towards it. So she had to find full rent. Then she said, this is why I'm up the food bank. I don't know how I'm going to manage with electric or gas, but as long as I got food and a roof over my head, I'm happy. There's a lot of people in Swansea don't realise how UC fluctuates if you're earning a wage and you get in that UC top up or benefit to help you with the rent. You earn a little bit over. It's like you're getting penalised. And then they saying to me, well, it wasn't worth me going back to work. So I can understand why certain areas are going into poverty. The help's there, yes, but when you're trying to help yourself to take yourself up to that next step, you're penalised and knocked back down. I found out the lack we got up our area pretty good. He's found out a lot of people are not on the right benefits, and he is signposting them to the welfare benefits to get it sorted out properly, because most of these people are using food banks, which working people, to me, shouldn't be using food banks. I've used food banks when I've had debts coming in, and I've had to, otherwise I wouldn't eat. So at the end of the day, it's the benefits, the fluctuation of benefits that is messing people's lives up, really. So until you see, can sort of, I don't know, get the money together to sort this out properly, it's not worth people working. That's what they're saying to me. Because I got to go food banks. I was better off on my full benefits. I said, yeah, but that's putting you into poverty. Oh no, I was better off. So it swings and roundabout. It really, know what I mean? Oh, everything that's out there in Swansea to help the people of Swansea, it's there and available. But trying to guide, as they say, you can take a nose to water, but you can't make it drink it.
Right, fine. Thanks for sharing that. And I think everybody would agree that work must always pay, ultimately. Do one of you want to come back on that?
Go on, you to the
Anthony.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you. Yeah, you know, even prior this, and this is why you're looking at the impact of the cost of living is so important. But even prior to the cost of living, in work poverty is higher than workless household poverty. So in work poverty, so a household with somebody in that household working, whether it be part-time, full-time, is higher than out of work poverty. And of course, with the cost of living then contributing, you know, add into that, it's if you are in low paid unsecure work, or perhaps you have that kind of insecure work, unreliable hours, you are going to be struggling to make ends meet. And food banks will report there are many people needing to access that support with who are working.
Fine, thank you, Michael, and then Sue.
I just want to apologise for being late, Lyndon.
Oh, okay, not to worry. Good to see you, Michael.
Could I just clarify some of the stats? You quote food price inflation going up 7% annually from 21 to 24, at the beginning of 24, and it's now the beginning of 26. So has that trend been maintained, or has it got worse, or has it improved? As far as you know.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not able to answer that question with facts at this moment of time. That's something I'd have to go away and look at to see if that data is available. But speaking earlier about it's that the point is there that it's that cumulative price rising, which is rising higher than like average household income. So as that gap of what it costs to have a basket of goods, of essential goods and services, as that rises exponentially year on year, rises on top of previous rises, but wages aren't necessarily keeping up with that, you're going to find more and more households are struggling to make ends meet. You're going to have households that previously might not have struggled, but now are. And look, it all adds. If you then, take into consideration what Joseph Rowntree Foundation is saying about how more households that are below the poverty line are actually 10% or 20% even further below the poverty line, and that's growing. You can see how the cost of living, if food prices are the accumulation of that compounding of price increases, is faster than household income, and certainly that universal credit isn't keeping up with what that basket of essential goods and services would cost. You can see how it would in fact affect more and more households, and those that are really, really struggling are going to be really struggling to afford the essentials, which is why we're seeing higher demand. The food banks will report higher demands than perhaps they were 7-8 years ago.
Great, thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a really interesting one in terms of food prices, and I suppose that we've probably all noticed it. We noticed that when we go to the supermarket, we seem to be getting less in our basket and it's costing more, and it's all changing. And I think over since 2021 and how the sort of global markets changed is really interesting. And myself and it's one of our accountants, we often have this conversation. So if you go sort of pre 2000, you'd get a range of supermarket options. You'd get the finest, if I say, then you get the standard, say a tin of beans, finest, standard, and then you'd have the value. And it'd be a significant price difference between them, wouldn't it? Say one would be £1, that would be about 70 pence. The value one you might get for about 30 pence. But over the years, I don't know if you see how that's changed. If you next time you're in a supermarket, go and have a look. So the value one and the standard one is there's about 10 pence difference, and even the finest one isn't even that much more expensive. So how it's changed over the years. It's a really interesting example to look at, because it kind of demonstrates how everything's shrunk. So there's less difference. So where you could have gone to Tesco, a supermarket, and got a pile of value, you can get those off the shelf value products, which are food. They might not be as good as quality, but they are food. Even that bit of it has gone up as well, because the global markets have changed so much in terms of the manufacture, the supply chains, all of those issues. So it's compounding, and you're seeing it. So all of those slight little changes, and then they come in, and then you can see, and actually some people, as Maya described, people who are working are in food banks because they can't afford the basket of essential goods. And so it's a really interesting example how those things have changed subtly over the years, that you don't, if you're okay and you've got money in your pocket to buy food, you wouldn't kind of notice them. But if you are counting your pennies in terms of your food, then that is a significant difference, and you can see then how that's playing out in the stats. Sorry, I've got, so just an example.
Great, fine, thank you. With the Joseph Rowntree Foundation giving 26 figures for the year 26, we should be able to get those figures about food costs, because I would have thought, I've noticed them going up quite significantly, but there might be a way of getting that. Michael.
What I've read recently is that actually the lowest price goods in supermarkets, the value ones, are going up the most.
Absolutely, you can see that happening, because there's no, I guess the manufacturer cost is the profit margin must have shrunk. I'm not sure how it's happening, but you can see that's definitely is happening. I think Joseph Rowntree's will publish. They normally publish, I want to say around the October time. Could be earlier. They might do a mid-year. But I know that around the October time, they will publish the sort of basket of goods kind of cost, because they use a lot of their data to inform what would be a real living wage. So it goes into that, but I know that that's normally around the October time. I don't know when the next release would be in terms of updating those stats that it comes through. But I know that that's, and because they use those indicators to determine the cost, not the cost, the value of a real living wage as opposed to national living wage. And even that, in terms of national living wage and real living wage, has got, you know, there used to be a couple of pounds difference per hour. That's much shorter now, isn't it? It's very similar as well. So everything's gone like this rather than there's those differentials, which is making it harder for everyone.
Great, thank you. Could I throw a few things in? You mentioned during the course of the presentations about borrowing. Some people are borrowing money. That could be from families, yes, but may not be. It could be from loan sharks and, you know, banks, maybe, I don't know, credit unions, but it could be loan sharks as well. And that must be a real worry. And I bet you might have seen examples of that in Penderry. And it's a real worry, because the interest and the pressure they have, interest they get charged, and the pressure they have to repay it is a massive worry. And do we do anything around that? It's something we could probably look at as part of this inquiry, because I think it can be quite a worry. There's that. The other thing is, one of the other things with this is getting people into work, which you mentioned, and I visited one of our teams at Estorva about a week ago, and they were providing really good support to workers, and I think that's important. I also, which I'll bring up when we talk about our plan, but they're important as well. And I met one other company in Swansea. They do work for the council too, and what they do is that when they help the person into work with their CVs and so on, but they go one step further. They actually hold their hand for the first 6 months. They ring them a couple of times a week. Are you getting to work? Because that is important, because sometimes people get over the hurdle of perhaps getting a job, but also they don't then retain it. And sometimes it's because it's about confidence building and actually getting them to the interview, because you'll always get an element of people who don't want to work. That's fact. But a lot of people, they've been made redundant, they lose all their confidence, and we've got to get those people back into work. And sometimes you've got to help them and hold their hand to do that. And there were some examples with both of those organisations where they were actually physically doing it, and their job retention rate was extremely high. And I think real lessons to learn from that. So that's another area. The other thing is, one of the things that we heard at council last week, and that was the Swansea Pledge. And one of the groups I met hadn't heard of the Swansea Pledge when I met them last week. So that is something we need to probably look at, and how we can do that. And the other thing, David Bowden spoke at council, and also one of the things which we'd created in the old policy development committees when they were around, and that was the skills partnership, which was one of the things that I was involved with suggesting. And that is really important, that because what we do want to do is to get people into work in Swansea, but we want them to get into good jobs too. And yes, if they want to go away, but if they want to stay, it's really important that they can be here and in a good job. The skills partnership brought together schools, the universities and business, and we get them along to Education Scrutiny every year for an update. And it's doing well. Some areas can be doing better, as always, and we always want them to do more. But I think that's an area we need to look at as well, is how we can really push that to help people to get into those good jobs, and jobs that pay, to alleviate the problems that Meyer mentioned. And it really is important. And you often find, I often see when we do education scrutiny, we're really keen with schools where there is poverty, because we really need to help those pupils, because they very often are the best people to work with, and they can get the top jobs. So it really is important, and they're missing out unless we do it. But I think that's one sort of area. No, that was, and the other thing is teaching cookery in schools. Now, Rodri Jones came along to give a report on that, and the only thing I could say, a start had been made. But when I was in school, my best friend in school, his aunt was a cookery teacher in one of the schools, and people were taught how to cook. And I was behind somebody in a supermarket the other day. Their trolley was filled with ready meals. And how much was all that costing? And stuff that you go into the food bank that you could get, and that we could do more of, but we need to get people back into learning how to cook. And I've been pushing that from that side, and I think it's something that we need to look at and put pressure on. So I'll throw those few things into the mix, if I may. I don't know if anybody wants to come back, or if you'd like to come back, or Michael.
Just pass a comment. What Lyndon has just said. These ready meals and what that kind of food is ultra processed food, which is really bad.
Meyer has got a hand up. We've got a few hands up. Meyer, and we've got Alan. Meyer first.
Right. At one time, up at the local shopping centre, it's a food bank. About 2 years ago, with a young girl called Alicia Hughes from University St David's. She works on them, but she lives on this estate. She was brought up. She ran a cookery course off what you could get from a food bank. So she asked everybody that was using the food bank, can you give me a recipe of what you got in your bag? And fair play, we had good feedback of what they could make from the fruit and the vegetables and whatever they had in that bag for that week. And we produced a book on how to live off very little, like from food banks, how to produce a meal for your children that is fit rather than going for frozen meals. And it went down well up on the community. And there was a lot of ideas thrown around between working parents and ordinary parents, and the elderly as well. They give us a few recipes that the young people were quite taken back by. And they didn't even know how to make a Welsh cake, nor how to put a pancake together. But it's great to see that people are interested in going back to the old style of cookery, which they're not teaching in school. How to make a simple corned beef pie, or corned beef hash, or a sausage dinner. They don't know how to do it. It should be brought back into education and taught as well. Because when I went to Cloynabryn All Girls School, we were taught how to cook, how to clean, how to sew. I know things like that, the modern day. It's nothing to youngsters these days. But at the end of the day, the price of food is up there for the cheaper stuff. And when you can go from a food bank and have a better meal than you could buy down the shop, it doesn't make sense. To me, it's like this. Or as one of the kids said to me, it's 6-7 miles, 6-7. Give a bit of both.
Thanks, Meyer. You were making us all feel very hungry there, I can tell you. But really, the point you make, really important, and we have been taking that up with education, and that they come each year to report back. We need progress on that for the reasons you say. And would you like to come back? Yeah, it's Anthony, and then Alan, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, cooking. So aside from cooking in schools, we handle, as I said, some of the food poverty funding, which is accessible by organisations and services in Swansea. It's not just about bolstering food supplies for food banks. Eligible criteria for that grant is around developing cooking projects, perhaps cooking on a budget, this sort of thing, but also community growing in terms of food as well. And over the last few years, you know, when we launch these grants and make them available, we try and push that, you know, don't forget, it's not just about the food, it's also about, you know, we'd love to see some applications of cooking projects in communities. And over the years, we've seen some great projects developing. There are organisations, there are community projects going on in Swansea now where that cooking skills is taking place in, you know, in a nice, accessible setting. Children cooking with their parents as a group. We've even got the warm hubs where it's not about the cooking, but quite often some of those activities around food, it may be just some refreshments, but some of them are doing meals as well. And the community will be involved in the preparation of that food as well. So I think over the last, you know, few years, we are seeing more and more of that, and we keep encouraging that, keep encouraging projects to think about how they can include cooking skills and cooking activities as part of what they're delivering in Swansea.
Thank you. Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a comment rather than a question. And thank you, Jane Anthony, comprehensive report, as always. I think we've all got a fair idea of the effects of the cost of living. I mean, it does lead towards poverty. And I think tackling poverty, bearing in mind, Chair, that you did mention we're going to have a plan, I think the crux of the plan would be is how do we go about tackling poverty, and what's out there that we can seek help. Because, I mean, it has to be a multi-layered approach in some way. Council, with support from the Welsh Government, a third sector, those organisations, perhaps we need to know who those organisations are. How can we get in touch, and what do they have to offer? And then we have, I mean, community groups, and of course, people who have lived and experienced poverty themselves might be of help to us. I mean, we've really got to, I mean, I suppose, I mean, Anthony has said it already. I mean, we got to think about maximising income. You know, how do the, you know, claiming benefits, reducing costs in some ways, getting people together to get a grips of how they can address reducing costs. We've also mentioned, I think, the improvement of education, training, and getting people into employment, as well as I think we need to think about the health and well-being of many people who perhaps live in poverty. I'm sure that, well, we do know that, I mean, the health and well-being of some of these peoples is not what it should be. And finally, I don't think we've mentioned it as yet, but I mean, we do have a fair degree of homelessness in the city, and I think that needs to be addressed. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to? You're okay, right? And but the points noted, Alan, absolutely. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. I think, you know, you've got to learn to cut your cloth according to your means, haven't you? And I think whoever decided that schools would be teaching cooking and needlework, I've got a lot to answer. There's a huge generation there that aren't able to cook. I learned from my mum. But those situations are not as they are now. And lots of mums can't cook. To make a stew that'll last you 2 days for a family of 5, 6 is far easier than going out and getting these processed meals. So I think we are doing catch up on the situation with cooking, unfortunately, but it's budgeting according to what means you've got as well that we need to be looking at. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sue. Jane.
It's really interesting is the conversation around cooking in schools, and we've all touched on it. And when I was in school, it was quite a long time ago, it was called home economics, and it touched on all of those parts of the budgeting, and that you could, you know, you were taught to make the corned beef pie, you made a meal out of it and nothing, you didn't throw anything away, you used the different parts. And there is something that's lost in that kind of that we have lost over the years, that just as you said, so Maya's touched upon it as well. So it's actually, how do you recreate that kind of understanding that it's all interlinked, isn't it? But yeah, and I think it does start in school, because that's where you know, that's where you learn it as well. You know, you learn it from home. But if we've got that gap where you're not learning it from home, it's got to be somewhere. So it's a really interesting one that to take forward. Sorry, Chair.
Great, thank you. I think family units are different as well, and sometimes people aren't taught at home to cook, it's important that we embrace that, really, because if we really are going to talk about cost of living, one way you can save a lot of money and get better food, as Michael said, the fact that we organise, get people to cook. The other thing is, I think there are loads of good examples that are taking part, that are happening every day in Swansea in different wards, and I think we need to look at some of those examples that will help us with this inquiry, because they will, lead the way forward, and everybody can learn something every day. So I think it is really important. Are there any other? Yes, there is. Jeff has got his hand up, and then what I'd like to do is we've got to discuss the draft terms of reference then, if that's okay. Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I must admit, I was in the middle of writing a chat to you. I'm going to have to leave very short, well, the next few minutes, actually. I've got another meeting in Alpha. But one question, it's a bit of a bombshell, really. I wanted to ask, and it's related to what Myra said. If people are penalised for working, is it worth just living off benefits? Or are benefits really a no good area? I know it sounds a little bit simplistic, but what sort of levels are we actually talking about of income before people actually get penalised? Sorry, it sounds a little bit crude and so on, but I'm sure people sometimes need to, what are measuring really, what's the point of working if if I'm going to get penalised for it? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go in a second, but I don't know if anybody wants to just respond to that quickly.
Anthony.
Yeah, it is something just to try and understand. It is complex. I'm not going to give a clear answer here. I think I'd be keen to. Oh, sorry, apologies, little distraction here. Sorry. Sorry, yeah, as I was saying, I think it's not going to be like a single figure. People's circumstances are nuanced, and you've got benefits that don't put households in a position where they can afford all the essentials. And then you've got to look at what does the economy look like, the local economy in terms of opportunities for work. We want work to pay fairly. What does that look like? And the employability team, they work hard to get people into work that does pay fairly. But you're going to have that kind of area in the middle where there might be people who are aspiring to get to it, but there are barriers and challenges to doing that ultimately are financial, but can also be linked to that, around transport, around childcare, understanding. I think the point here is around understanding those barriers to work that pays fairly, understanding what that looks like, what they are, calling in the different kind of expertise that we have in the organisation and our partners around that might be insightful.
Okay. Our welfare rights team have I've seen a presentation around the changes and the move to universal credit, because that's going on at the moment. I don't know if some of you councillors have seen it. Jane done a session, but I think that presentation, I can find the presentation and circulate it, because it kind of describes the changes. It's really complex, and I won't even attempt to describe it myself. It doesn't give a definite answer, but I guess it shows the complexities and all of the changes that's going on. And I guess it's really difficult because, so I guess from us as a council, we can do, what can we do to support our communities, because we've got absolutely no recourse to do anything about the universal credit system. And that's what makes it really hard for us on the ground, isn't it? And just to say, oh gosh, because, which is the difficult thing, I think, for us. We all,
thanks for
I've,
that. You know, I believe,
I've
you
seen
know,
that presentation and it is
Sorry.
confusing.
Yeah. Anyway, I think work should pay for people. I think work is good for people, you know, for their mental health
Absolutely.
and nothing else. But it must be tempting, really, if you're being penalised to work. Anyway, Chair, I have to leave. My apologies.
Great, thanks, Jeff. No, indeed, as we, I said to Myra, you know, it's got to pay to work, and it really is important. But it's also important that we get those good jobs in Swansea as well for our people in Swansea. Right, are there any other questions? If not, we'll get on to the next item on the agenda. But can I thank Jane and Anthony? Really fantastic, really good to have you here, and as always knowledgeable and really useful. We're going to put together now a sort of a work plan for the next number of months, and I think listening to things everybody's talked about and the things you've raised, you can see a bit of the flavour of it. Okay, but thank you, and you can escape if you want to.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us, and we, you know, where we both are to help the inquiry as we go along. More than happy to be involved. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Right, the next item on the agenda is the excuse me, the project plan. It's a moving feast, really, because we can add things in as we go along, and we'll need to, because we'll do one meeting and all of a sudden something will come up and it'll be really important. And Michelle has put together a sort of a brief plan here of different sessions, and one or two things that we've picked up today from various people, including things that I've sort of mentioned, and that is cookery in schools, because teaching people to cook, I think we need to raise that into it. Also, with regard to employment support, you know, there's around the Swansea Pledge and the Skills Partnership. I think we need to learn what we can do and how we can develop that and suggest how that can be developed. I met up with the group, and I'll tell you who they were from the council, and they were extremely good. And that was the employment support team at Sova. And interestingly, they were saying how one individual, he got 45 people into work and so on, another one 33. Well, gosh, every single one person into work is a person who's into a job and helping with the cost of living. So useful to speak to them. And that other company who do work for the council were a company called People Plus, and they based, and anybody who want to go there, perhaps we could visit it even. They based on Orchard Street, and really useful. And they hold those people's hand, the people who are out of work, they hold their hands for a number of months, so that they make sure they've got transport into work, they've got all the ingredients to make them keep that job, you know. So
it would
also
be good
the bank.
to visit that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm just that. And
what
look
I'm going to
what
suggest.
barriers they are coming up against.
No, absolutely. What I was going to, these are just a few things. If you want to come forward then with some others, Michelle will put together them all onto the plan, and then we can send it round and everybody can have a look. Is there something we haven't put in? And I want to add something else in. The other one is about the banks, because if you're going to get, you know, what are we going to do about the loan sharks possibly on some of these who target people? And, you know, what is the answer to that? Is it credit unions or whatever? But, you know, I think that's important as well, because cost of living and community resilience in the, you know, what happens in the community, but also in the communities where everyone is doing different things that will help. And we want to get examples of those, and people who come in or join us on Teams to talk about that. So that is, and growing, as you mentioned, growing food. That's me. Who else has got a few suggestions?
Visiting the food banks and talking to the people that are using them.
I agree with you there, Sue.
Yeah, the
There's
other thing
nobody
might be
better
is
placed than
how
them.
with food banks, how, I know we get people donating food and so on to them all the time. But, we can extend that as well, because I know during the pandemic in my particular ward, which is that people are a bit better off in that side, in that particular ward. But what we actually did was to actually arrange for a collection every week to take food to the food bank, and people didn't realize, because they didn't, that that was needed, and they were really happy to do that. And I think there are opportunities all across Swansea to do that. Maya.
Yeah, we're talking about food bank. We had a visit up at the drop-in centres food bank from Scrutiny Food Bank back last week with Rebecca Fogarty and a few of the committee members down there. They are coming away from the Trussell Trust and they're going independent, just like us up here, because Trussell Trust now has put certain of things in the way. Like if we had Trussell Trust at the drop-in centre, we couldn't run like the drugs program or social, different areas are not allowed to be doing it at the same time as Trussell Trust food is going on. This is when we need these agencies. This is where I can't get over
Working together.
yeah, know what I
Yeah.
mean? Why everybody is changing from Trussell Trust and going independent. Because they put a lot on, these are volunteers running these banks, not paid workers.
Yeah.
And most of these volunteers are around just a little bit younger than me and going up into our ages. So at the end of the day, Trussell Trust expects them to weigh all the food that comes in. It's got to be weighed there. And then all the food that got to go back that hadn't gone out has got to be counted and weighed back in. It's putting a lot on the
That's
volunteers, and a lot of volunteers have walked away from the Trussell Trust. And we notice vouchers. They only give you vouchers. You can only access a Trussell Trust with a voucher and your code. With an independent food bank, as long as you're from, like us, SA5, we've even given to SA1 because they haven't got nothing down there and they came up to us, and we would never see anybody without food. And we do try to guide them on health, education, going back to university. We've had a few gone back to university, all through food bank and outreach programs that the council are running, and they go in down a treat, but trying to get some of the service users to come in and just take a look instead of we've got to give them that push or hold their hands, as we've said. But at the end of the day, there's a lot to look at around poverty. There's poverty with electric and gas. I know I've had a message off one of the tenants today. I've just got billed £99. I really don't know what to do. I haven't got the money.
Yeah.
So there is energy poverty as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But if we can actually
food poverty.
Yeah, if we can speak to the people that are having the problems, I think that's the way forward. Yeah.
Forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good
There
idea.
we are, Linda, and over to you.
Thank you all. There are obviously loads of suggestions, and you know what? When you go offline now, you'll probably think of a few more. So can you email Michelle, and we'll put that together. But it is important, and all the points, and thank you all for your contributions. Michelle, she wants to, I know I've forgotten to tell you about something, and I know what it is. She wants the dates. Right, Michelle.
Yeah, just a couple of things. The first thing is there's a few things that probably be good to speak to as well is welfare rights, revenue and benefits, obviously to get a bit of the background there and what they're doing. SCVS, of course. I know they've got a poverty lab or something, haven't they? They've got something something's being done there. And there's also the Carer Centre and Citizen Advice. So I was thinking that they'd be quite useful to speak to. So I've noted those down. If you're happy with that. The other thing is we've got a couple of dates. You've probably seen them come round. I thought we could start off with the groundwork. So we'll start off what we're doing within the authorities. The first thing we'll do is speak to, it'll probably be in a slightly different order to what we've got on this project plan. It's going to have to be a bit of how we can organise things and how we can fit them in. But education seem to be able to come first. So the first one will be education and then social services. We'll get place, we'll get revenue and benefits and welfare rights in for a meeting. And then we can start going out. Once you've got all that groundwork, we can start going out and then speaking to people, can't we? And you've got all that basic knowledge then. Anyway, over to
Great,
Linda.
thank you. Yeah, it's really important. And, Maya mentioned, issues in her ward, and it might be good for us to come up there and
Yeah.
listen to people. But it really is
Absolutely.
important that we really get to the essence and of the issues and then come up with a plan, because at the end of
Yeah.
it all, as you know, we present a report to Cabinet and they then either go through the recommendations. A lot of them we hope they will accept, but that is up to the Cabinet. But we will present that report and then we will come back a number of months later, a year later it is, sorry, to see how they progressed on that report. So this is an important inquiry. So thank you all. As I say, as soon as you get offline, you'll probably remember something. Let us know, email Michelle and we'll include that, and then Michelle will send you a draft, because it's our program, it's what we want, all of us, and then we can add that into the program, and we can then she'll send it round to us all to have a look at, and then we can tidy it up at the next meeting if we need to. Okay,
Thank
Brilliant.
you.
great.
I
Thank you very
apologise
much.
again for being late.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
apologise again.
Ah,
Take
that's
care.
okay, forgiven.
Bye all.
See you then, bye.
Bye.
So,
Gosh, that's quite interesting, actually, isn't it?